Okay, I'm unmuted. So we started looking at some different passages in Matthew chapter 24, and we talked through those, and we said that, one of the common themes in what we were seeing is it was teaching just how sudden the return of Jesus would be. And there were a lot of different visuals that Jesus used to demonstrate that point. And, there's that passage we started with where it says that, verse 36, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And so, we started looking at these different passages that talked about how sudden the return of Jesus would be. And really, that kind of the key message in these passages, it could come at any time. So, so last week we started looking at the days of Noah and the days of Lot. And we're wrapping up our conversation, and we got into the days of Lot. And we were talking about how, in the Luke account of the Olivet prophecy, he not only mentions the days of Noah, but he mentions the days of Lot. So we took some time to look at that, and that's where we sort of finished off. I was talking with Brother Randy briefly. He said he had maybe some comments on what we were talking about last week on the days of Lot, where we finished off.
Well, we mentioned last week about the Bible and everything like that, but then you go to Jude, verse 7, it talks about giving themselves over to fornication, one after the strange flesh. So that goes back to what people think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was, and I think we have just a little vision of Sodom when we go into Genesis. But what we learn about Sodom is that it was an area that was prosperous because that's where Lot wanted to live. He could see the well-watered plains. But we also know there was like a lot of immorality, right? They were, trying to, these men were going after these angels that came to deliver Lot. And both of those things certainly are picked up. We looked at Ezekiel where it talks about how Lot's crime was fullness of bread. And then you mentioned the Jude passage that talks about their sexual morality. And when you look at the,
I'm turning on original sound just to see if we can pick up everyone else. No. Sorry.
Okay. So anyway, so we, in both of those passages, just looking at the Matthew one of the things that's emphasized is how life was just kind of going on as usual. It said they were marrying and given in marriage, they're eating and drinking until the day that Noah entered the ark. And so that was, again, the theme of those two things that Jesus called out was like they were just living their lives, and they were so absorbed in their lives that they just, when the catastrophic events happened, they were completely unprepared. And that's sort of the context of the warning for believers is like, just make sure you don't get pulled into this world too much. And I, definitely in our society, I know, speaking personally, it's just a challenge. It's just to not get pulled, so absorbed into like the day-to-day grind and what's going on around us that we're always seeking God's kingdom, and we're making sure that that's something on our mind. So it's a very powerful reminder. So just moving forward a little bit and looking through the rest of the chapter, the next illustration that comes up is in verses 43 and 44. And maybe we can just start in the front and work our way back. Nicholas, would you mind reading that? So Matthew chapter 24, verses 43 and 44.
Matthew 24, verses 43 to 44. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man is coming.
All right, thank you. So the next illustration we have talks about this master of the house who was watching his house for a thief. And it says if he'd known what hour he'd come in, he wouldn't have allowed his house to be broken into. So again, that's another illustration of the return of Jesus, it's going to be like a thief breaking into somebody's house. It's in the sense that it's going to be unexpected. It's the message there is just always be watching. And this isn't the only place that uses that imagery. If you turn over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And verses 1 through 4. And again, maybe Randy, if you want to read that, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 4.
But of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write to you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief.
All right, thank you. So again, using that imagery of the return of Jesus, that day is going to be like a thief in the night. And it's kind of interesting. He uses that passage where it says they'll say peace and safety, and then sudden destruction. So it's, the way Paul talks about it here to the Thessalonians, it's like, you're going to have this kind of false sense that everything's like normal, and then things won't be normal. Things will change very rapidly. And that's kind of his message here, to just not fall asleep, be always awake. Yeah, Brad.
Just think about what Jesus had to say before here at Thessalonians. Yeah. Probably historically, I thought a lot about the past, more from the perspective of, just we need to be watching the news, looking at Bible prophecy, and kind of trying to figure out, right, when he's going to come. But while that's important, that's really not the message that's being told here, because both of them are saying we don't know when it's going to happen. But I think what comes across in both those accounts is verse 5, I think, says it really well here, that you are all the children of the light and children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Because when does a thief come in early? It's going to come at night. It's going to come in the dark. The message is that we be people of light, that our lives reflect light at all times, so that dark situation isn't, that's when you get caught off guard, is when you're in darkness. As long as we're living after the light of God and the light of Christ, the thief isn't going to catch us off guard.
And really, that kind of picks up with the rest of what we see in Thessalonians 5, is that it's kind of use these different illustrations. It's like those who get drunk at night. Those who sleep at night. And it's all these illustrations about, using things from the world where people's guard is down. Your guard is down when you're drunk, your, senses are incapacitated. When you're sleeping, you're not alert. And that's always what Paul says, you need to be awake, you need to be sober. And because, that day could come at any time. And really, our day could come at any time. Something unexpected could happen. People always say, the kingdom's only a lifetime away. Some tragedy may happen in your life, and those things happen. So it's the message is just, there's a definite danger of complacency, and that's the challenge here. It's just don't be that person that is drunk or asleep. Be awake and be ready for the Lord. 2 Peter chapter 3 kind of picks up on that same message. 2 Peter chapter 3. And verses 10 and 11. Actually, 10 through 12, please.
The day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day of God and see its coming. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat.
And maybe verse 13 for some.
But in keeping with this promise, we're looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth, the home of righteousness.
Okay, thank you. So again, there's that idea of the Lord, day of the Lord being like a thief. And then the exhortation is, with that in mind, we should be living a certain way. Verse 11 talks about living in your conduct and godliness, but it also says we should be hastening the coming of the day of God. Looking for that day and hastening it should be in our prayers. And again, I think that that's a challenge sometimes. It's, when you got kids, for example, okay, we got, we're going to start preschool, we just want to see what our son's preschool is. You know what I mean? You start thinking about things in the world that really draw you in, and that becomes so important. But always in our minds, I think there's a challenge. What's the most important thing? We want to see God's kingdom come. And if we see the world for what it is and we see God's promises for what they are, that really should be on our minds. But again, that's a challenge to really hasten the day of the Lord, because in many ways you get comfortable with life as it is. And so those are the challenges of the words of Peter. So anyway, a couple of illustrations. So that's one illustration Jesus uses. The day of the Lord is going to be like a thief. The next passage uses a different image. And if we want to turn back to Matthew chapter 24. And if we could read verses 45 to 51 in Matthew 24. So basically verse 45 to the end of the chapter of Matthew 24.
Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom the Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. But and if that evil servant that say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in the day when he looketh not, an hour when he is not aware of, and he shall cut him asunder and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Right, thank you. So again, the next image is of a master who's got a servant, and he leaves him in charge of his house, and he goes away. And you think about that time and place. There was no communication. If you left someone in charge of all your property and stuff, and you went away, they had no oversight, right? If you're in a faraway land, they don't have any way to watch what you're doing. So it was really important that that person they entrusted that responsibility to do a faithful job, because they didn't really have, the company I work for right now, we're a business office here in Richmond for a larger company that has hospitals all across the country. And we're entrusted with certain responsibilities of their business processes. But we have people from corporate, and then we have people from the hospitals. They can watch what we're doing. They know our people's productivity. They know our cash results. They know, there's a lot of communication, and there's, meetings every week and things like that. So we're always under a watchful eye. But at that time and place, you didn't have those kinds of items. When you entrusted somebody with something, it was really important that they were faithful, because if they weren't, you weren't going to find out until you came back. And that's kind of the imagery here, is that, this is like a master who says to a servant, okay, I'm leaving you in charge of my house, and I'm going to go on a journey. And in this case, this servant turns out to be a bad servant. And what he does is, when he's entrusted with this, as he starts to see his master is delayed, he starts to mistreat those that were in his care. Now, this imagery, a lot of people say that you look at, the master leaves a servant in charge of his house. So who's the master in this? I think that one's a little bit more. Yeah, we think about Jesus. He's going away and he's leaving his. But who would be the servants that are in charge of his house?
It's us.
Yeah, and I think some people would argue this is specifically talking about maybe like the shepherds, the leaders, that are kind of have some oversight responsibilities over the people in the house, because it says that they're in charge of all they leaves them in charge. So a lot of people see this as referring to, at this time and place, kind of the apostles and elders, and then, in later years, whatever form that took. But that seems to be the message here. And you kind of ask the question, in verse 45, it says he needs to give them their food in due season. What is that? I mean, literally, we know giving them their food means you're kind of providing their needs, but what is, I guess, the spiritual application of that, giving them food in their due season?
Is to teach the body things that they need to know about, what this life in Christ is all about, and how do we do what we're supposed to do until He comes. All those lessons in the Word, like Rob was always quoting, these things were written aforetime for our learning and that kind of thing. Putting those concepts together so that we can move from the milk to the meat and become mature.
Yeah. So it's a Hebrews reference that you're making there, because Hebrews talks about teaching. It talks about the milk of the word and the meat. And you see that in the Bible. A lot of times doctrine and teaching are sort of equated with food. And so I think a lot of people see that here in this, is that part of that responsibility of a good servant who's been over the house is that you're giving good doctrine and teaching.
The servant's been entrusted with the growth of those that are part of this household. So it's a process, and he interrupts this process. But it should be a constantly, like Leah said, from milk to meat. It should be a journey, a growth of these people. So that if there's a responsibility there, it's to, I guess, shepherd people through that growth. And this servant's gotten distracted and forgot that responsibility. So these people are left without guidance to help grow.
Yeah, I think though we're each meant to see ourselves in this role as the servant. We're not supposed to say, well, that's not me, that's whoever's in charge. So it's not talking about me. I think it's like the analogy in the body. We each have our role, each do different things, have different abilities. And so that food that we're providing is whatever that ability is, whatever that talent is, whatever that body part is meant to do. That's the food that we're providing. I think it's interesting what happens to this servant. What's happening in his mind? Does he start off servant and then falls apart? And he doesn't see that actually, that oversight. Jesus may have gone off into a far country, but he's still right here too. And this servant isn't recognizing that. What's he thinking? Oh, when I see the signs of the times, then I'll straighten up. Or is he just gone?
Radiant.
Would it not also include the idea of the shepherd in Psalm 23, where he keeps the sheep from eating bad food that will harm them? Just make sure that they get the good food.
What's the Psalm 23 reading say?
Leading me beside the
Oh, right.
Green pastures, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
You're calling
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's also important to think about the steps involved in the servant giving the household their food at the proper time. We have to be prepared to teach. And one verse that I really like is in Ezra, I think chapter 7, where it says that he had prepared himself by learning the law of the Lord to teach. And that's why he was such a great leader in Israel when the exiles came back. He knew the law. And, a lot of times we're so busy making a living and raising families that we don't have a whole lot of time to study. And this has got to be just a concentration on us all the time, a consistent discipline that we have to be in the Word, like doing the Bible readings, And, you know, as far as like teaching our families as well, even that kind of giving your household food at the proper time. I was talking to young people at the last CYC, and I asked them, how many people's families do the daily Bible readings? And there were only about 2 families, 2 kids, groups of kids, family kids, who raised their hands. And we picked out, you know, who we thought were heroes, our heroes. It was the kids who were doing the daily Bible readings that picked out Bible heroes. I thought that was very interesting, because this is how we're shaping our household to know God or to not know God.
I feel like there was somebody else.
In verse 48, I think it speaks about what Leah and Casey were saying, that the servant's looking around, and the servant looks around and says, I got time. I've got time. It's gonna be a while for the Lord. So the servant takes their eyes off, you know, what their responsibility is. And I think that can happen individually, and that can happen in family situations as well. And maybe that's what Leah is referencing. I'm not sure, but certainly in a family situation, that's if we're blessed with a family, that's our biggest opportunity on a daily basis. You know, execute this role. What this shepherd took his eyes off. And it also, I think 48 ties into our Sunday school verse, because had this person been cognizant of the fact that the Lord is there, you know, whether there's just 2 or 3 of us and we're doing this in his name, you know, he may be delayed, the coming may be delayed, but he's still here. Just like the responsibility was still here even in the absence of the master in this example.
Okay.
How might we meet our fellow servants? You know, that's going a step beyond just not doing what we should be doing.
Yeah, what is it? What does that mean on like a literal, in a application sense? Like, how do we, you know, in terms of our brothers and sisters? That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, there are obvious answers, like what the Judaizers were doing, trying to get rich off of it, somehow making money off of it. But I feel like if this has a broader application to all of us, then there's got to be maybe some things that we're doing or not doing amount to a spiritual being.
Yes, if you take what John wrote in 1 John 3, that whoever hates his brother is a murderer. But we're not talking about murder here. So we might not even quite be talking about hate. I think what Casey was saying earlier, that we're seeking out the growth and well-being of these servants, so that effectively, if we're starting to mistreat them, in a spiritual sense, it may just be not caring and not giving them that growth and attention.
Leah?
I believe that when the servants start fighting with each other, it's because they have become more inward focused than they have outward focused. And, you know, Jesus, the last thing he said before he went up to heaven was, go into all the world, you know, and preach the gospel, baptizing people through the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That was our job. That was our main job that was given to us. And so when we get to take our focus off of that outreach to the world to save people, that's what we're here for. We're here to light, you know, good news to the world, not to just hoard it all to ourselves. You know, one verse I really like is 1 Corinthians 9:14. In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. You know, this is, and here's another one. Do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? You know, not even saving up money for people to do outreach. You know, like it says here, those the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. So you can't really preach the gospel if you're busy making a living by the 5 every day.
Yeah. It's definitely a challenge because our community has sort of stayed away from that, but in the Bible, it seems like there were people who were making a living doing the gospel work. Randy?
I'm going to put a whole different meaning on it. And it's based on the idea of eat and drink with the drunken. And the drunken, as we saw from the references to Sodom and Noah, they were the world. And I think what he's saying, he's talking about an evil servant. And I think when they talk about smiting their fellow servants, you think back to the Old Testament where evil king would smite and kill the righteous. So I think he's referring to leaders who ally themselves with the nations and smite the righteous servants, which did happen.
Yeah, sir. I mean, you read the history of Christianity, a lot of people who broke away from like the tradition, you know, the Orthodox Trinity and things like that, they were like persecuted and put to death and in jail. I mean, that's definitely, yeah, there's some definite literal punishment that was meted out by some leadership.
And they're going to think that they are the true servants of God, but Jesus said, I got a surprise for you. When I come back, I'm going to be quite angry with you.
See, yeah.
I think back to feeding of the servants, not physically, but kind of along the lines Casey was saying that there people have different talents, and at least once, maybe more than once, I've heard people kind of downgrade people that don't have the same talents they do, and I think that's a way of like emotionally hurting the fellow believers.
Mm-hmm. I did want to look at a few cross references that kind of pick up on this idea, both of shepherds and feeding. And back in Ezekiel, chapter 34, there's a place where he's told to go and proclaim a message to the shepherds. Ezekiel chapter 34. And at least I saw some parallels between what this is saying and what Jesus was saying here in his message. Ezekiel 34 and then verses 1 through 4. I think we're in the third row back and maybe Ezekiel 34, and it's 1 through 4.
The word of the Lord came to me, son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord God, all shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat fat, you clothe yourself full, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep.
Just that, sorry.
You have not strengthened the sick, you have not healed the injured, you have not bound up. This strayed, you have not brought back, lost, you have not sought, and dwarfs and harshness with them.
Thank you. So, you know, at least for me, when I read this passage that Ezekiel is giving to the shepherds of Israel, and who are the shepherds of Israel? This would be people in government. These would be your priests. These would be different roles. And they weren't doing, you know, they weren't being good shepherds. You know, a good shepherd takes care of the flock. A good shepherd, as it says here, they bind up that which is weak, help those which are sick. They find those that are lost. And it says in verse 3, it says, you eat and fat and clothe yourselves with the wool. And it's like you just focused on yourselves. You're not taking care of the flock. And so, I don't know, I kind of see that as a parallel between what Jesus was saying back in Matthew where you have the servant who's left to feed the household is not really doing his job. He's mistreating people. And so again, it seems like a similar message here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It just seems to me in this section here that the word fat doesn't mean what it appears to, because if the sheep, you know, picturing sheep as people, if they're fat, you know, it says later, it says, but you don't feed them. Well, how are they getting, you know, the fat? You know, so it just seems like there's some other meaning behind that word. It just doesn't make sense to me looking at it.
Other versions say curds, not that. So,
I would say it goes back to the offerings. The fat was supposed to be offered. And you think of Eli's sons eating the fat. I think that's a similar thing to say here.
Yeah. Leah?
It kind of reminds me of when Jesus said, you don't go into the kingdom of God yourselves, to the Pharisees, and you prevent those who do want to go in from going in.
Yep.
So they were kind of hoarding the riches of God's word for themselves, but also twisting it, you know. And then you know, it's kind of like some religions who, like you've heard about, you know, for instance, some religions who burn Bibles, who wouldn't allow their people to read the Bible because they only wanted the clergy to dispense the word and have all that kind of power and knowledge and everything. I think that's really what it is here.
Now, I wonder if the Pharisees were able to read this, or the leaders of the Inquisition were able to read this with a clear conscience, because they knew it. And if they could, there was obviously some blind spots. And you can look at that and say, well, how to do this? If they run the same risk of having some blind spots. Say, well, we're feeding, we're taking care of them, we're eating them, no, we're really not. We think we are.
Yeah, are we hoarding, you know, the word to ourselves instead of sharing
it? In all of these examples that we've read, it's the common theme, I think, is an abdication of responsibility. And that's, we can look at, you know, people at this time, but certainly they'll look in the mirror. I mean, these words for us.
I was just going to say, regarding blind spots, we all have them for sure, but it's a fine line between not doing enough outreach and not doing enough inreach. Like, I think it's all really, 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 really well and good to share our light every single day and what we do. But if it's not starting at home, if it's not in this room, if it's not helping each other, are we fortified enough to go out there and do outreach if we're not inreaching enough, or even within our own families? I think it's got to start there.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. That's some good feedback this morning. God willing, we'll kind of keep progressing towards the end of what Jesus teaches in Matthew on this subject, and really reflect on not just the return of Jesus, but really what we should be doing when Jesus comes back. So thank you, everyone, for your feedback. But we do have one comment online. Let me see. I'll just share that. Oh, never mind. That's just a technical comment. Okay. Thank you, everyone.